My name is Dr. Katie Kelly. I am the supervising attorney at the Children's Rights Unit for Community Legal Services. We practice in 12 counties across Central Florida, and the vast majority of the work we do is devoted to kids with disabilities, kids in care who have school issues, who are either do not get the appropriate supports and services at school or are disproportionately disciplined at school. We've been doing it for a long time. We were the first education unit in Florida to do this. So we're real proud of it, and this is my partner in crime.
Hello, I'm Valerie Blocker, and I'm a children's rights attorney for Community Legal Services.
Can you all hear me, or do you need me to use the mic?
Okay.
Yes? Mm-hmm. See how she helps me? Because I'm elderly. Okay, so this is the school to prison pipeline, making a difference to keep kids in school and out of prison. So, you know, we hear a lot about this school to prison pipeline, right? You know, it's just a tag phrase. But how often does it happen? I mean, are kids really being pushed out of schools and into jail? Well, this is a graphic that may be difficult to see from the back. I'll just read it to you. 40% of kids expelled from schools each year are black. 70% of students involved in in-school arrests or referred to law enforcement are black or Latino. 3.5 times, that's how often the black students are 3.5 times more likely to be suspended than whites. As a matter of fact, there's a statistic that if you are an African-American girl, you are 7 times more likely to be suspended, expelled, or arrested for the exact same behavior done by a little white girl. 2 times, black and Latino students are twice as likely to not graduate as white students. 68% of all males in prison do not have a high school diploma. 50% of kids in the foster care system are black and Latino nationally. 30% of foster care youth entering the juvenile justice system are placement related to behavior. 25% of young people leaving foster care will be incarcerated within a few years. 50% of young people leaving foster care will be unemployed within a few years of turning 18. And 70% of inmates in the California State Prison are former foster care youth. I mean, that's telling. That's telling. So Florida can't be that bad, right? Who thinks Florida's going to do better? Nobody. Y'all live here. Florida's school to prison pipeline is the largest in the nation. Surprise, we excelled at something, and you know, it's probably not what we want to be great at. As talking back to your teacher increasingly leads to misdemeanor criminal charges, experts say that the arrests have a lifelong consequence. So, what are we talking about in Florida? How many kids are being arrested at school? Well, the latest numbers from the Office of Civil Rights says that there were 1,768 arrests at school, school referrals to law enforcement, 16,747. So over 18,000 kids were arrested in a year in Florida schools. So this is difficult to see for you guys probably. These are, what do they get arrested for? So assault and battery is the first one. And that is the vast majority of the cases we see. It is a felony in Florida to touch a school board official in a way that they do not like. We have had clients 6 years old arrested for stepping on the foot of an associate principal. 6 years old. It is very common in our practice to represent 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds. The majority of these kids have autism, and nobody cares. If a teacher gets angry, they can go file a charge against the student. And there is no misdemeanor battery in Florida. If you touch a school board official, it's an automatic felony. The best you can hope for is to be found incompetent due to age or disability, but that remains on your record. The felony remains on your record. And I don't know if you guys know this or not, felonies cannot be expunged from a juvenile record. So in Florida. So it's forever. It is the never-ending job stopper to get a felony. The other thing we see is increasingly in group homes. If there is violence in a group home, they will charge a student with domestic violence, with domestic battery. That is also a non-expungible felony. So, and then the other ones are disorderly conduct. I think we see a lot of that, disorderly conduct, because they'll charge kids who fight with that. You know, if they want them out of school, they will charge them with disorderly conduct in the thought that maybe DJJ will take them. I don't know where DJJ is supposed to take them because they're as overworked as everybody and there are no places to take the kids. So some counties are better than others. And you guys have access to this PowerPoint. I suggest you look up your county and we'll tell you more how to get better information in the rest of the PowerPoint. So, what about kids in dependency? You guys know this, I'm preaching to the choir. If a kid is in both dependency and delinquency, they're crossover kids because they've crossed from one system into the other. There's currently approximately 1,000 crossover kids, meaning kids in placement who are also actively in the court system. Kids in dependency are particularly vulnerable for being arrested for status offenses. Status offenses are things that they can't arrest you and I for because we're adults. But by status of age, these kids can be arrested for them. So it's like curfew violations, truancy, underage possession, running away, incorrigibility. Conflicts in group home can lead to domestic violence charges, as I said. That is a felony. That is non-expungible. And they are also, kids are statistically more likely to be suspended or arrested at school. The kids who are most likely in the universe to be suspended and arrested at school are kids in dependency who have a disability. And if you are a kid of color in dependency with a disability, your chances of being arrested or suspended and expelled are very, very high. So we know that kids are being arrested in these really big numbers, but what is the school to prison pipeline and what does it have to do with me? The school to prison pipeline, it's a metaphor, right? It's just a tag we use. It covers this widely known set of dynamics that push kids from school into prison every year. Kids in dependency, like we said, are particularly vulnerable, and your advocacy can do a lot towards stopping that. So what are the dynamics that push kids into prison and out of schools? First one is zero tolerance policies and school districts' overuse of suspension for minor, often disability-related behaviors. And we'll talk more about each one of these in depth. School districts' overuse of law enforcement in dealing with behaviors, and the school district's underuse of federally mandated protections. And those protections are things like IEP plans, 504 plans. All of these dynamics, we're missing an A, all of these dynamics are discriminatory and they lead to devastating outcomes for students with disabilities. So, zero tolerance and suspensions. Now, I'm just going to tell you guys, we are in a post-Parkland world, and this was getting better, and in the last month, 6 weeks since Parkland, it has gotten tremendously worse. I've been consulted on 3 kids in group homes who have been arrested for making threats at school. Kids with disabilities, I'm sure you guys know this, particularly kids on the spectrum, will make threats. They make threats. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to bring a gun. I'm going to kill everybody. They've been saying that since they were 3 years old. They're not going to do jack. They don't have guns, right? I mean, hopefully the group homes don't provide those. So, you know, but post-Parkland, in Volusia County alone, the sheriff just proudly announced the other day he's arrested 40 kids for making threats at school. Now, he forgot to say that the vast majority of those kids were kids with disabilities, and P.S., he's charging each of their parents $1,000 for the pleasure of arresting them, to cover costs of arrest. I mean, you can't make it up. And we'll talk about the statute that went into effect, the Safe Schools Parkland Act. It's just kind of thrown all of this up into the air for advocates, and it's going to make our jobs increasingly difficult. So, zero tolerance policies, that's a policy that means no matter who you are, if you do something, we're going to do this. We're going to suspend you. We're going to expel you. We're going to arrest you. In 1996, they decided, well, you know, that's kind of draconian. We can't do that anymore. And the DOE came up with their own statement about it, saying that the legislature finds that zero-tolerance policies are not intended to be rigorously applied to petty acts of misconduct, misdemeanors, fights, disturbances. The legislature finds that zero-tolerance policies must be applied equally to all students, regardless of their economic status, race, or disability. And what that means is you can't take kids in poverty, you can't take kids of color and decide you're going to show them a lesson, you're going to teach them a lesson when you're not teaching lessons to, you know, the blonde kids in the room. So, according to the United States Department of Education, the civil rights data collection, and we're going to tell you more if you want to look at that data is very compelling. Over 2.8 million students were suspended at least once during the 2013-14 school year. This is only going up every year, but that is the last reporting data we have. Students with disabilities are disproportionately represented in that number, and they are twice as likely as their typical peers to be both suspended or arrested. In some counties in Florida, it is up to 7 times more likely if you have a disability that you will be suspended or arrested in Florida. And black males make up 1/2 of all students suspended, although they only represent 8% of the overall population. Black males who are disabled are overwhelmingly the most likely to be suspended. And if they are in care, that number, it's amazing, it's incredible. In Florida, we have seen and we have spoken to the Office for Civil Rights about this. We believe the Florida numbers are underreported. I mean, when we do our own district assessments, we are finding many more kids have been arrested at school, suspended at school, than they are reporting to the Office for Civil Rights. So suspensions matter. Why do suspensions matter? Big deal. You're throwing him out of school, he gets a day off. Well, according to a study by Johns Hopkins University in 2013, Florida 9th graders who were never suspended have a 75% graduation rate. Now, we're Florida, right? So a 75% graduation rate for Florida is pretty good. We've got a lot of poverty in Florida. We've got a lot of transients in Florida. So 75% is pretty good for Florida. But those who are suspended once only have about a 50% graduation rate. Suspended one time, that is one time, one day. Those who are suspended twice have a 38% rate of graduation. And I will tell you, once a student is suspended one time, the chances are exponentially increased that they will be suspended again and again and again, because kids then get a target on their back. Once they've had them in the office, once they've made the decision to suspend them, they can pick those kids out in a crowd. And if there's a crowd problem, they're going to pick the kid that they recognize to come to the office. So what are the academic effects of suspension? Further academic regression, we know that. Further disengagement from academics, why do I care? It increases the likelihood of poor school behavior. Well, I've already been suspended, you know, forget it. Increases the likelihood of future suspensions, increases the likelihood of dropping out, increases the likelihood of community legal involvement from unsupervised time out of school. I once had a young man who was suspended, so what did he do? He went out and decided to steal a bike because he was home all day, and so now, you know, he's got a criminal record as well. Students with emotional, behavioral, or learning disabilities who are more likely to be suspended than other students without disabilities continue to have serious negative outcomes. This is not like a typical kid who is suspended once, who will go home and maybe mom and dad will, you know, raise the roof. Oh my God, I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. You take a kid with an academic disability or a behavior disability, that just throws a monkey wrench into his world to be suspended. Now, you know, he's already done the bad thing. Now maybe he wants to identify as, you know, a bad hombre, in the words of some people. So, the long-term effects of suspension. A suspension can be life-altering. It is the #1 predictor, more than poverty, of whether children will drop out of school and walk down a road that includes a greater likelihood of unemployment, reliance on social welfare programs, and imprisonment. And that is from Education Week. So what's the financial cost of dropping out? Like, we talk about what does it do to the kid, but what is the financial cost of kids dropping out? Because we know if you start suspending them, they're not going to make it all the way through. Well, a study from the Center for Civil Rights Remedies and the Civil Rights Project at UCLA found that student suspensions cost the nation more than $35 billion with a B in lost tax revenues and increased social expenditures combined. You guys are prime witnesses to what happens when we fail children and what it costs the system, what it costs us in society. I mean, think about the combined budgets of DCF, GAL, Children's Home Society, CBC, CPC. Think about those combined budgets when we have system failures for children. The CCRR reported that estimated that school suspensions contribute to 67,000, almost 68,000 additional high school dropouts nationwide. They looked at one cohort of 10th graders and extrapolated that data from it. And if you multiply that with 10th grade cohorts from additional years, meaning, that was just one group of 10th graders. Now, you look at all the groups of 10th graders who have gone through, that number can easily exceed $100 billion. And when I first started doing that, I thought, oh, that's a made-up number. That's like bull. That's too much money. It is not. I have checked and researched, and these are, I believe, accurate numbers. So, dropouts earn more than $330,000 less in a lifetime. Okay, so what's that mean? They're not paying taxes like that. They're not able to support the economy if they earn that much less money. Each individual dropout costs the nation more than $163,000 in lost tax revenue. There it is, amounting to $11 billion in fiscal impact. Each dropout incurs more than $360,000 in social expenditures, right? So increased health care costs, like, Medicaid. I mean, if you can't be employed, you need to be on Medicaid for health insurance, or like some of our clients, you just show up at the emergency room. Now someone pays for that. A 1 percentage point reduction in the national suspension rate, 1%, would save the nation $2.2 billion in fiscal and social losses over the lifetime of those individuals. And cutting the suspension rate in half would result in $17.8 billion in savings, including 5.5 in tax revenues and $2 billion in health savings, $3 billion in crime savings. And a lot of this data doesn't even include crime data. So what's the second factor? We said there were 3 dynamics to the school to prison pipeline. First one is the zero tolerance. Let's get everybody out of school who does bad. The second one is the overuse of law enforcement in the school. Now, this PowerPoint was developed just prior to Parkland and the new statute that says there must be one resource officer in every school in Florida. So you can just take these numbers and run with them, right? So this is the percentage of law enforcement that we have had in the schools historically, right? Back in 1970, there weren't any. There were, back in the day, maybe you'd have Officer Friendly stop by the school, check on the kids, do a little presentation. 1997, we started to get more kids, or more cops in schools. 2003 and 2004, holy Hannah, now we've got 35%. 2007, 2008, now we're up to 40%. In Florida, that number next year will be ostensibly 100% of the schools. So, typically today, before this law is enacted, 47% of all schools have some kind of law enforcement. Why? Since 2013, there have been more than 300 school shootings in America, an average about once a week. School shootings so far in 2018, and we probably, I think we did this last week, we probably need to modify this. There have been at least 20 school shootings since January where someone was hurt or killed. That does not count the number of times a kid went into a school with a gun, right? This is only if somebody was killed or shot. That averages 1.25 shootings a week. I guarantee you, I promise you, if Walmart had these numbers, we'd all be up in arms. You know what I mean? If we thought we were going to get shot going in a Walmart, we'd all be up in arms. How we cannot be heartbroken that we are sending kids to school to, on some level, become targets, it is just astounding. So, unfortunately, school resource officers have not effectively stopped any of the shootings, nor have they been shown statistically to improve school safety. They have never saved a life during an active shooting. They have never improved the situation. And as a matter of fact, in Baltimore last month, I thought, okay, we finally have the first law officer shooting of a perpetrator. We finally have that. Turned out the SRO shot the kid standing beside the perpetrator. The perpetrator shot himself in the head. So another example of this is Marion County. Last week there was a school shooting. Law enforcement took 14 minutes to get to the hallway. A school teacher looked at the young man and said, if you put the gun down, if you come in and talk to me, I will talk with you. I will help you. The teacher helped. You know, I think Valerie and I would be proponents of training school staff on de-escalation and on caring for kids, because these kids are deeply, deeply traumatized that do this kind of thing. They are deeply traumatized. And as we know from Parkland, that young man was a student who had been in care. And so, you know, there were so many failures associated with that. So here's another concern. This is a percentage of officers previously forced out of other state law enforcement in Georgia. And this is Georgia, right? So you've got, if you look at this blue line, what that tells you is where these officers worked before, and that many of the officers that are being used as SROs around the country, I wouldn't say necessarily in Florida, but around the country, a lot of guys go to SROs when they have been pushed out of road jobs. You know, road officers, you're not allowed to be a road officer anymore. When we pull the personnel files of law enforcement officers who have been rough with our clients, a lot of times we see a history of them being physical with other citizens while they were in patrol cars or while they were stationed in other places. We see that kind of history of unnecessary roughness, and then they decide, hey, school will be easy for this person, we'll move them into a school. Well, have y'all ever been in a high school? I mean, if you want to go to a high-stress place, go to a high school. You know, it's just mayhem, and it's not because kids are bad, it's because kids are kids. So that's a problem. So we've got the first two, we've got that zero tolerance, we've got the overuse of law enforcement, and the other part of law enforcement that we see a tremendous amount is that schools, you know, look, everybody's tired. We're all tired. I know y'all are tired. I'm tired. We're all tired. Anybody who works with kids, you're tired. You're tired and you get heartbroken because you see the worst things on earth, right? So school officials are tired, and they have a lot of kids with a lot of needs in those schools, and they don't know what to do. And when they get tired, they get angry, and instead of dealing with the discipline of a student on their own, they will call a cop, because that cop is sitting right there. So when a kid has a meltdown, a kid with autism has a meltdown and is screaming, I don't want to, I won't go with you, F you, whatever's going on, or a kid with a behavioral disability, or a kid who has suffered trauma is not reacting the way we want them to react, school administrators are tired of it. You know, they're tired of it. The teachers are worn out. They don't get paid enough for this. So what do? They call a cop. Here, why don't you get him out of here? Why don't you Baker Act him? You know, why don't you arrest him? That's what the problem with having so much law enforcement in school is. The other problem is they're trained law enforcement officers. They look around the room, they see, hey, you're being, you know, loud. You know, hey, you threaten somebody, that's an assault. You know, because threatening someone with imminent harm is an assault in Florida. So, you know, you just committed an assault, you're out of here. So it's kind of a bad dynamic. So those are the first two factors. The third one is the underuse of supports and services with students with disabilities. How many of you all think there's a correlation with being in care and having a disability? How many of y'all think that? Yeah, okay, somebody raise their hand. Okay, look. There is a high percentage of kids in care who come with disabilities, right? Because disability is a factor that destabilizes homes. You know, we have been court appointed many times to kids with severe disabilities, for the kids that have ended up in dependency. And part of the reason they end up in dependency is because the parents have no support for the disabilities in their home. So, of course, if you are dealing with kids in care, chances are very, very good that they either had a pre-existing disability or they have a manifesting disability based on the trauma, abuse, and neglect they have received, okay? So, we're going to talk about what we do with kids with disabilities. So, in Florida, the last year that they collected data, the OCR, the Office for Civil Rights, there were 47,000 kids with disabilities suspended from school and 108 kids with disabilities expelled. Students with disabilities are more than twice as likely as typical peers to be suspended and expelled. Black kids with disabilities are between 3 and 5 times more likely to be suspended as typical peers. And in Florida, like I said, that number ranges anywhere between 5 times more likely and 7 times more likely. So, you know, if a kid's suspended or arrested, yeah, that's bad. But if you're a kid with a disability and you can barely hang on in school, you know, that's devastating to miss a day of school because nobody's going to find you, catch you up, tell you what's going on. And these suspensions can last up to 10 days. Now, you've missed 10 days of school and nobody's going to welcome you back and say, hey, honey, come here, I'm going to help you with what you lost over the last 10 days. So the missed instruction, you know, none of that gets to the underlying reason of why these kids are acting out. Every further exclusion, either through suspension or arrest, leads to more statistically significant educational outcomes. A vicious cycle occurs where you have this minor incident, they go out, they get behind school, they can't keep up, now they're going to misbehave again because they don't know what's going on, and it's just this vicious cycle. And kids with disabilities, like we said, are the most likely to enter the school to prison pipeline. Kids in dependency, the crossover kids, we've already gone through this, they are much more likely to end up in the school to prison pipeline. Transitions between homes, for every transition a student makes, a placement transition, they lose 9 months of academic work. 9 months for every transition. And people are really unsure as to why that's happening, but we know it to be true. Trauma and abuse and neglect lead to behavior issues, y'all know that. And due to these multiple transitions, kids in dependencies are often not identified as being students with disabilities. They get moved from school to school to school. Somebody notices, hey, this one can't read. Hey, this one can't do math. Hey, this one seems a little crazy. But no one in the district is willing to invest that time to do an evaluation because why? Because the district has 60 days to complete that evaluation. It is their legal responsibility to finish it once they start it, and that kid may not be there. I mean, frankly, a lot of times school districts are hoping the student will go to a different placement and they will no longer have to deal with it. So, this is the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act. Rick Scott signed it in March 9th. The goals are to make Florida schools safer, keep guns away from dangerous and violent individuals within individuals' mental health. I mean, you'd think that'd be common sense, right? And improve mental health treatment. Why don't y'all guess for me which one of those got the least amount of funding? Why don't y'all guess? Let's just rank those. Oh, wait, they already are ranked. Look at them. So, if the courts can prohibit now a violent or a mentally ill person from getting a gun, although the NRA has already filed suit in the state of Florida to stop that. They believe that's unconstitutional under the Second Amendment. Allow law enforcement to seize firearms when a person's been Baker Acted. Again, that's being challenged in court. Prohibits a person who's been adjudicated mentally defective, there's a term we don't use except in law, or who has been committed to a mental institution from owning or possessing a firearm. Like where they got this language from, I have no idea, but you know, to use mentally defective and mental institution kind of shows you who's writing the laws. All individuals who buy these guns have to be 21 or older. They create a 3-day waiting period and establishes enhanced criminal penalties for individuals who make threats to schools. Now, 2 of those three are being challenged in court in Florida. Which one is not being challenged in court in Florida? Oh, wait. Enhanced criminal penalties for kids who make threats to schools. You know what? I mean, the vast majority of these kids phoning in these threats, I mean, I'm just going to say it, they're dumb as rocks. I mean, these kids do not understand the consequences of what they're doing. They are middle schoolers. You know, they are kids that are dared to do these things, the vast, vast majority. Because I will tell you what, I read a lot. I have never read that anyone who shot up a school went on social media more than about 8 to 20 minutes before they did it to tell people about it. The kids who are making the threats are not the kids who blow up the schools. They're not the ones doing it. The knuckleheads who make the threats are the ones sitting home on their little computer, you know, being dumb. I mean, that's what we've got here. And statistically, a great number of those kids are kids with autism, you know, somewhere on the spectrum, who do not understand the gravity of the things they say. $400 million, okay? Mandatory active shooter training in schools every semester. This must be fun for the kids. Increase information sharing. That increased information sharing terrifies me. Now, imagine you are the parent of a high schooler. Imagine your high schooler suffering from anxiety, depression, right? Do you want that information shared with DJJ? Do you want that information shared with the school? I wouldn't. I mean, this mandatory sharing of this very personal information is terrifying to me. Mandatory threat assessment team in every school. And certain teachers can volunteer to carry a firearm. Teachers are the angriest people I've ever met. I was a teacher for 20 years. I taught emotionally and behaviorally disturbed kids for 20 years. Nobody should have ever given me a gun. To this day, I should never carry a gun, okay? I mean, look at me. I mean, I don't need a gun, okay? So having teachers carry guns, I mean, I think they let some guy in Georgia carry a gun last month, and he accidentally discharged his firearm in the classroom, and it ricocheted, and it hit a kid, and then it busted out a window, and I'm like, Wyatt Earp, put the gun down, okay? You don't get a gun. $400 million, $75 million for mental health counselors. Of course y'all are familiar with CAT teams and these mental health teams that come from kids' private mental health providers. Like I know we have, anybody from Volusia County? Oh, I'm alone. The mental health money did not go in the school. The mental health money went to it's funneling down through DCF, it goes to DCF, and it funnels down through other providers. I'm just going to leave that there. That if I had $75 million for mental health help, I probably would have given it to the schools who actually see these kids every day, who actually know these children, who actually know what's happening here. I probably would have not given it to a huge bureaucracy. And I have nothing against DCF, nothing. I laud every bit of work they do. But I would have liked to have seen that money go directly to the schools, because the schools are the people who get stuck with the kids all day long, right? And they need that. They need that funding. $99 million, safety needs within each school district. That is for hardening. They call it hardening of schools. So that is not a lot of money. When you consider to harden a school, you're supposed to put fencing around it. The way it works now is the Department of Homeland Security, believe it or not, goes to the school, tells the school what they have to do to harden that school. Well, I work with council in a lot of districts, and they're saying things like, well, you need to put a 10-foot fence around this one. You need to, change the traffic flow. You need to put in barricades. You need to have a metal detector. money, 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 money. $99 million for the entire state for that. That's impossible. Districts cannot do that. They cannot do that. Now, what kind of liability does that create when they've been told what they need to do to make a school safe and they don't do it? All the parents of the survivors are going to be suing that district because they knew what they had to do and they couldn't do it. So the whole thing is very kind of wonky right now. $28 million to expand mental health service teams statewide. And these, again, are out-of-school teams. So why won't the Public Safety Act fix the problem? Well, I think you've heard my editorial so far. Officers versus services. You know, we got these law enforcement officers, but they haven't helped yet. I'm not saying they won't be trained to help. I'm not saying they're incapable of help, and I'm not saying they're bad people. Please do not take that away. I am not blaming them, but they are not trained to deal with what we're dealing with today. $162 million for safe school officers, requires a safe school officer at each school. Typically, this is the way this looks. I will tell you in Marion County, for instance. Marion County got $760,000, I believe, for law enforcement. The day after they received that funding, the sheriff from Marion County gave them a bill for $830,000, approximate. More than the amount they were given. Now, the school now has a deficit. I believe I was told in Volusia County the deficit is $4 million for law enforcement. Where are they going to get that? That has to come from somewhere. So, of course, it's going to come from all the other services. So, the bill, although well-meaning, has put this tremendous pressure on the schools to cut funding because no additional funding was given, you know, to the schools. So, now they have to get this money from somewhere. So, what does improve school safety? So that's like the negative. That's the, oh my God, the sky's falling, right? So Chicken Little just left. I will tell you what fixes it. Identifying students with behavioral and mental concerns. Supporting students who have behavioral and mental health concerns. Training staff to identify students who may be struggling. Developing valid anti-bullying curriculum and district procedures. Those are the things that we know that help kids. I mean, I can't tell you, the Parkland shooter should have been identified in second grade. Actually was identified in second grade, but he wasn't supported. And so what happened was his behavior got increasingly concerning, and instead of all of these things pushing in that are supposed to push in, he got expelled from school. He got removed from school. Now what's he angry at? Well, he's angry at school. And if you notice these school shooters, you do not hear about these kids going out and shooting up a Target or Kmart. You do not hear these kids going out and shooting up their church. You do not hear them going and shooting up a football game, which is a lot more targets in a concentrated area. They go back to the place that caused them pain. They go back to the hallways of their schools. And that is tremendously telling to me. That is tremendously telling. So what can you do to fix it? You can do actually a lot. How many of you all are advocates for students in schools? Right, good, tremendous. You can advocate, advocate, advocate. These are not throwaway children. These are not throwaway children. Had the Parkland shooter had mental health help before he was 18, this probably would not happen. Dylan Klebold, all of the people we know, those Sandy Hook, all of those were missed opportunities. I encourage you, if you're interested in this area at all, to Google Sandy Hook report. So many missed opportunities for that young man in special ed in school, kids with IEPs, kids with 504 plans. Federally, the schools are mandated to provide all of these services to these kids, and they just aren't doing it. And it's not because they're bad people, it's because the kids aren't identified, or because there's limited funding, or because we're all tired. But all of those kids, the vast majority of all school shooters have received special ed services, okay? The vast majority of young school shooters, white male school shooters that are young, have been shown to be on the autism spectrum, okay? The Aurora, the kid that shot it up in Aurora at the movie theater, he's on the spectrum. Sandy Hook, he's on the spectrum. It's not a shock that, you know, these are kids that we can identify when they're little, and if we advocate for them to stay in school and get mental health help, we can prevent a lot of these shootings. I think we can prevent more than we can fix. You can put all the cops in all the buildings in the world, but I think it's a lot easier and a lot more humane to just prevent this. Kids with learning disorders, you know, kids check out of school, that's the first step. Kids exposed to trauma, abuse, and neglect. These are the kids that are very vulnerable to this. Kids in dependency, they don't often have parents or caretakers who have previously advocated for them. Look, a lot of our parents in dependency did not have successful school careers, right? They're scared of school. School only calls when the bad thing happens. You know, these parents are not equipped to advocate many times. They don't know how. And kids in dependency often lack a historian who can go back and say, you know what, I think someone said something about a spectrum disorder when he was little. You know what, he really suffered some devastating things. Let's not assume he's okay just because he hasn't done anything for a year or two. And finally, if you get a kid who's being arrested or suspended or expelled, you need to look and make sure his mental health needs are being met and that his behavioral needs are being met. So how can you advocate? Do we have any attorneys here? All right, yay for the attorneys, thank you, thank you. So what can you do? You can check for trend data, and we're going to show you how to check for trend data in your county. Because we know the kids that are most involved are kids with kids of color, kids with disabilities, kids in care. So here's the trend data. You can go to the Office for Civil Rights, data collection, fascinating stuff. They break it down by school. We filed a large Department of Justice complaint against a school district in Florida for the disproportionate use of discipline against kids with disabilities. And we found out that 100% of the kids arrested in one problem school were kids with disabilities. 100%. I mean, they didn't arrest anybody who didn't have a disability in that school. I'm like, wow. The other site you can go to is the Florida Department of Juvenile Justice. How many people are familiar with the dashboard, the DJJ dashboard? DJJ dashboard's a tremendous resource. I mean, I love those guys. They've got arrests by school, you know, referrals by school. You can kind of see if you've got a problem. Now, if you have a school that deviates from the district norm, like you've got the one school that's arresting only kids with disabilities, it's time to talk to your district about the administration of that school. Like, what the heck's going on? Like, you're only arresting, you know, black kids, or you're only arresting kids with disabilities. That might be a concern. And when the district is presented with numbers like that, they are very open, because they know if they're not open, somebody like us is going to come along and, you know, encourage them to be open through a federal complaint. So this is what the data looks like. Where do I find trend data? And you probably can't see this very well, but these pie charts are really helpful. You can see, can you see my mouse? No. The bottom left, that pie chart, that is overall the number of kids who are suspended. So white kids are the teal blue. Black kids are the orange. Look right above that, top left. Oh, wait. There's only 15% of the district who identifies as being African American. Why do we have twice that being arrested? So this data is very interesting, and I like a pie chart because, you know, I can be just dumb on a particular day, look at a pie chart, and I can figure that out. Some of the other data is on Excel charts. I don't know who invented Excel, but, you know, I don't get that. So these are interesting. Half of the kids expelled were black. If you look at expulsions, bottom right, half the kids are black, and the other kids were Hispanic. What? You didn't expel any white kids? I mean, there wasn't one expellable white kid in your district? it just is very telling when you see it like that. Okay, so here is the school arrest comparison by county. Y'all can't see that, but it is in your PowerPoint. That's interesting because there's such a wide variety, and it is not based on any kind of like urban nature of a district. Like people use the word urban, like we don't all know that means, you know, diversity. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with who's in charge in the district. So how can you advocate? If you see a trend, tell the district there's a disproportionate discipline by race or disability. Let them know. Tell them people are watching, and remind them that there are grounds to file a complaint. Tell them you can refer to an attorney who will do that. We are always open to referrals, Val and I. We work for Community Legal Services in Mid-Florida. If you see a problem in a district, call us. Call us, we'll look at it. So, what kind of complaint can you file? Well, you can file an Office for Civil Rights complaint. That's a civil rights complaint. They enforce civil rights. You're talking about civil rights when you're talking about disproportionate discipline. If you're disciplining one group of kids more than another group of kids, it's a civil rights violation. Anybody can file one on behalf of anybody. I mean, it's kind of like if you think it's going on in that district, you can file it. You do not need a client. You do not need a plaintiff. And you can do it through that little website there. The only deal is, if you see it, you got to file something within 180 days. State complaint. If a kid has an IEP, you can file a state complaint. They're not following the IEP, they're doing this, they're doing that. You have the power, use it. And we're done. Yay. You guys have any questions? That was a lot. Go ahead.
Have you had any information on class size related to this? Because I know we have a class size, and I taught for 7 years in the high schools, but there are so many loopholes and so many ways to get around it that the reality is that there's 30 plus kids and the teachers cannot know what's going on with all those students along with the curriculum that they're supposed to do and the testing and everything. So have we had any data that would support that if we could just reduce
That smaller class sizes would help. I think smaller class sizes would help in the identification of kids with disabilities and problems.
You either have to repeat the question or...
Oh, okay. Does there's a state statute that says that class size has to be below a certain number in Florida, right? And the question was, do you think that keeping to those smaller classes, 26 or below, I believe it is, would be beneficial in all of this identification of kids with disabilities or in preventing the school to prison pipeline? Yeah, I think it would. But you know, school districts have 99 problems and class size isn't one of them. Marion County has 300 open teacher positions currently. 300. Volusia County, I believe, has 180 open positions. Who do you think they're looking for? They're looking for special ed teachers. They're looking for the people who have to deal with these kids. I represented 5 kids in one building in a county where they had 4 behavior programs in that building, 4 behavior classrooms. Every single one of those teachers was a substitute teacher. And when I said, why are these substitute teachers? What are you talking about, substitute teachers? These people have been here for months. A substitute teacher in Florida doesn't even have to have a college degree. It can be anybody. And so they had people without college degrees teaching the most intensive kids in the district. And then they wondered why they had such high arrest number out of that building, such high suspension numbers out of that building. It's just amazing. We have such a teacher shortage in this state, and I don't know what to do about it. They recruit all over the country. After the hurricanes, they went to Puerto Rico to recruit, thinking, oh good, there'll be unemployed teachers, they can come. And it's tremendous. We don't pay teachers in Florida. We just don't pay them. We don't value them. We don't treat them well. Yes, ma'am. Right.
They got moved, and their guidance counselor is assigned to only do the testing now, so they're useless to me, sort of
Right.
information about what's going on in this kid's life. So to me, it's almost like
The question is, why am I against information sharing as a general rule between community stakeholders? I have absolutely no problem with transparency within a school district. None. I do believe everyone in the school should be aware of the burdens that the kids have. Absolutely. Where my concern is that we are identifying kids who seek mental health treatment as potentially being the next school shooter. That is my concern. And so my concern is that DJJ should not know that a student is accessing mental health treatment. Because that is not, first of all, as an attorney, that's protected information, right? That's all, we all know about HIPAA. So the second concern I have is if we have too much identification of students with mental health concerns, that we will have people not seek treatment. Because I know, frankly, I would think twice before getting mental health help for my student or my child if I thought that that was going to be reported to DJJ or he was going to be put on some kind of watch list. You can't get out of things like that once you're in them. Mm-hmm. I think there needs to be more clarity with statutes like that. I think there needs to be more clarity into who knows what. Now, because, think about it. If a student is Baker acted, schools always know that. And they know that usually because that student has a mental health case manager. But number two, they know that because the student has either missed school or the Baker Act has happened from the school. I don't have a problem with that kind of information sharing. I really don't. I think schools need to be aware of who is struggling in a school. I think that's the only way to fix this, is if schools are aware of who is struggling in a school. What I have a problem with is rules that aren't clearly enumerated as to who knows what and what is the standard for that. Because as an attorney, we have standards for everything. If there isn't a standard, like maybe it would be a mental health, or maybe the student would need to be in an overnight for a mental health concern, a Baker Act. I could understand that being reported. I can. But it just needs to be very clear who's going to share what information, because I do not want mental health to become some kind of secondary terrorist watch list, right? I don't want that. I really think kids with mental health concerns are entitled to some privacy. Right. Right, and as it is now, and part of this is my personal experience, in the state of Florida, if a student has committed a felony, the school is automatically made aware of that. It doesn't matter what kind of felony, it doesn't matter what it's for, it doesn't matter where it happened, the school is immediately made aware of that. I think that's fundamentally unfair.
And secondly, a lot of what you talked about, you talked about minor incidents, and I think there are some major.
No one wants to defend. They're talking about minor incidents versus major incidents, right? No one. Look, Valerie and I both have kids, okay? Valerie's got 3 little ones in school. Nobody wants to overlook something dramatic. Nobody wants to allow dangerous kids in school. Nobody. It's not good for any of us. What we do for a living is we represent kids who are arrested for disability-related behavior. And I can tell you, in our world, where we are, I get probably 5 phone calls a week from parents saying, my child was arrested, my child was Baker acted, my child was this, out of school. Overwhelmingly, these are elementary school children with disabilities, and who do things like push to get out of a doorway. You push somebody to get out of a doorway because you're having a meltdown. That child is being arrested. So, no, nobody wants to look the other way over a student who does have the potential to hurt people. Nobody. I taught. I was in schools for 20 years. I taught. I raised kids who went to school. Nobody wants to be responsible for that. I'm talking about the overuse of the things we talked about today. Okay? Any other questions? In the back? Sorry.
And I'm just curious, you said that, and I work for the Department of Juvenile Justice, just as a,
Mm-hmm.
you said that the new statute, would allow DJJ to receive mental health. We received that already. If someone is, we talking about people who are arrested,
Yes.
well, why would we receive information from them if they haven't been arrested?
It is very unclear from what we know, okay? And we can be,
We don't get involved with the case
right,
unless someone is arrested. And once they're arrested, we have a specific obligation to ask in our multidisciplinary assessment whether or not they have any mental health issues. That's part of our mandate.
right. And
We
I,
already have mental health information. Not only that, all of our records are confidential. So juvenile records are confidential, and you can't discuss it with anyone if
Right.
they don't have a specific reason to hear it.
Right.
Now, in terms of information sharing, we have agreements with law enforcement already when we share information.
right.
DCF and with our providers. I'm not quite sure
I think,
the specific.
I think the concern for us is, and until we know more about it, until we see how it's implemented, the concern for us, because we are child advocates like you guys are, right? I think the concern for us is how much information is going to be shared and how much of it is going to be used to preemptively target kids. That is our concern. It is not that you all share, it is not that you all, because you should, because we've all got compacts, right? So that information should be shared. And DJJ definitely has to have mental health information, especially when you're talking about placements, right? To get help for kids.
Well, just so
Yeah.
you know, every kid that's committed to the Department of Juvenile Justice has a psychological before they play. So we have psychologicals on every kid that's in our that we place in residential placement, unless it's placed from the bench.
Right.
So, but I'm just
No,
not.
no, this is all, our only concern, and like I said, it is not the current level of information sharing. That is not our concern. Our concern is that, like I said, that people will try to preemptively identify kids with mental health disorders and try to somehow treat them differently.
We don't get involved with kids unless they're arrested and they go on. They would have to have had an incident for us to even
Right.
get involved. So I'm not quite sure what the concern is, because if someone is arrested, whether it be a civil citation or early intervention program, or they have a status offense and they come into our custody some kind of way, that we would have that information anyway.
I understand. I hear what you're saying. I've just expressed my concern. I can't say it another way. What we are worried about moving forward, we are worried about how much information is shared, not for kids necessarily in DJJ already. We're just concerned about it, okay? And that's all I can do is express my concern and, move on. Okay, in the back, there was a question?
For a child in the dependency system who has diagnosed with PTSD and placed in an EBD classroom, how do I get that child out of the EBD classroom and into the mainstream? Because it's a vicious cycle once the child is in the EBD classroom.
It is.
Start with that point system that they can never get out of.
Point systems are actually illegal under the Office for Civil Rights because what you're doing is, it's like saying to a kid with diabetes, once you've had 5 days of good numbers, we're going to let you get out of this nursing office. Or we're going to let you go on a field trip once you've had 5 days of good numbers. Some behavior is just not preventable due to dysregulation of students with autism or other trauma events. things in that classroom may trigger that student based on what's happened. What I would suggest doing is making sure that they're using trauma-informed care in that classroom. I would advocate for trauma-informed care in that classroom, which is a different approach than a typical behavior room, because I ran behavior rooms for years, and there's a difference between tough love, firm, fair, and consistent is what we call it, which you do for kids with choice behaviors, with choice bad behaviors, and then what you do for a kid with autism who may be having some kind of sensory overload, some kind of, mental health problem associated with the sensory overload, and then what you do for kids who are traumatized. And those kids with trauma have a very different set of needs, and I would ask that their needs be met based on trauma, and then I would ask that, that they start taking data for you. They take a lot of data. Why is he acting that way? When is he acting that way? I'd get in there and ask for those behavior plans to be changed every time there's an incident. They have to do that by law.
There's a lot of fight or flight.
Yes, yes. And that should be part, yes, the fight or flight, that should be part of his behavior plan. I mean, you should be there when the behavior plan is made to provide a way for him out of that classroom during a crisis moment, to a safe place, to a safe person, to someone else. Because the last thing you want to do is keep the cork in the bottle after it's being shaken, because it's going to explode. So, yes, ma'am. Oh, sir, I'm sorry, you were first, sir.
As an attorney, it's often difficult to make a school district do something because of separation of power. So I did like your discussion about some of the remedies that are available to us, and I just wanted to know, you did mention the Office of Civil Rights is a place that we can go to when we see a disproportionate trend, but you also briefly mentioned an IEP. What is the body that we go to when there are issues? You said the state complaint, but I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about
Yeah, the question was about the state complaint process. If a student has an IEP and the IEP is not being implemented correctly, you can go to the DOE, and there's a link, and you can file a state complaint. The state complaints are good for, if they didn't provide the accommodations they were supposed to provide, if they didn't give him the classes that are on there, if they didn't work on the goals. It's ticky-tacky procedural stuff. IDEA is the law behind the IEPs. It's a very procedural law. We prefer to go to Section 504, which is a very broad and very deep law that covers all of that, and to make the claim that that student's rights were being violated because as a person with a disability, they weren't being given what they needed. And Val and I both can talk anybody in here through that. I mean, we will be glad to talk because it is fact specific. So we'll be glad to do that. Also, too, if you see a trend in a district, don't be afraid to call up the Department of Justice. And they are very, very interested in disproportionate discipline in Florida, and especially among students with disabilities. Very interested in it. Yes, ma'am.
Hey, Katie, this is Deborah Shrove.
Hi, Deborah. How are you? Nice to see you.
Good to see you. I just wanted to know, in the beginning of your talk, you mentioned the percentages of children in foster care who then are in DJJ. Where are those statistics?
I got those from Alan. I literally had to email because there was no clearinghouse for those numbers. And that was the best guess. And I have encouraged people, could we please track those numbers? Those are important.
Because they don't.
Yeah.
And DCF's data system cannot talk to DJJ's data system directly.
And I thought we were getting that fixed like 2 years ago when we worked.
It's absurd because DJJ used to be part of DCF when it was HRS, and then they split.
It would be nice to have that information. Just, I also had difficulty finding out the number of students in care who graduate every year. That number I didn't think was easily available either. And I just think, we do so much information sharing among each other. It would be nice if we all had a place that was easy to access, that we could get those numbers. Because the crossover kids are particularly concerning. I mean, Val and I did a lot of work back when it was a Georgetown project, and, to try to kind of see what's going on here. And it's just very hard to get those numbers. Yeah. Okay. Yes, ma'am. was that?
By the time I was assigned him, I had him for a month. I didn't know he had an IEP, and he was kept out of school for an incident that he was involved in for over 15 days. And if you don't have an IEP, if you don't know that they've got an IEP in the school, then they're going to say, hey, I didn't know, so I was able to keep him out for as long as I thought was appropriate. And I don't know what we do to make sure when these kids bounce around so much. This particular adolescent, I think, had been in 18 different settings.
Oh my God. Yeah. So the question is, the comment is like, paper doesn't follow the kids very often, right? Or sometimes it doesn't. Well, how many are familiar with ESSA now and the ESSA staffings? So now ESSA is Every Student Succeeds Act. It's the reiteration of No Child Left Behind, right? We got rid of that. Now we've got Every Student Succeeds Act. There's part of that kids in care are no longer covered under McKinney-Vento when they're in transition. They are now covered under, which is the homeless statute, they are now covered under ESSA. Every student who makes a transition now, the school should have an ESSA meeting, okay? An ESSA staffing, it's called. Case manager, whoever goes, and that's by statute. And usually we find it's by circuit who decides to go to these things. You make the determination whether the student stays in their school of origin, whether that's best for them, or whether they move to the new school, the school where their new placement is. Now, if a kid is out of county, you can't really do much about that. But within the same county or even neighboring counties, you have the opportunity to have that student stay in the school they were in for stability. During those staffings, that should always come up, whether the student has an IEP. I really don't know how to make sure those IEPs travel with kids. Theoretically, it would be the case manager is aware and should hand that information off. But I don't, yes ma'am?
Typically, I work for Disability Rights Florida. We're the Safety Protection Advocacy Agency, and I deal with all special ed, predominantly behaviorally challenged
Okay.
students. And typically, we have other students that do either come from out of state or from different counties. It is generally the school district's responsibility to identify the student as far as child find goes, see if they were a student with a disability with an agency before. So you may, as soon as you kind of track down where they've been, you may want to contact the previous district to see if they have previous IEPs from other districts in their cume folder. All of that should be compiled somewhere.
Does Florida have a central database of certified?
No.
Iowa did.
Right, they do, and they will be in every kid's cume file, but the problem is kids move into, say they move from Lake to Orange, okay? So the student shows up in Orange. Now, ESSA says the student must be enrolled immediately, regardless of whether they have records or not. So you enroll the student, great. Well, that school, and schools are bureaucracies. Anybody who's ever tried to move a school district, it's like pushing a big boulder with your nose. That school district then has to send something to their office of school records, who then sends something back to the old county to say, could we get the school records, please? And then that county, depending on how backed up they are, will send the records to the new county, and the IEP will be in there. By that time, the kid's in a school, right? The cume file stays in the office, and those IEP records may or may not get to the student. I mean, we've had students who have been enrolled in school for months and months and months and months, and then somebody goes, what do you mean he's got an IEP? What do you mean we're supposed to put him someplace else? So it really, sometimes it works incredibly well, sometimes it does not work incredibly well. So, yes ma'am.
I just wanted to say, I'm not sure how we could fix that issue. I'm from Disability Rights Florida as well, but one of the ways that we kind of remedy the situation when they didn't realize that the student has an IEP is we request compensatory education services for the time.
Oh, that,
They spend it and they weren't providing services.
at that is after you discover. Yeah, once you discover that the student is a student with a disability and was entitled to services under the IEP, yes, obviously ask for that time back. So if they had speech language once a week for an hour, you would ask for that many hours back. If it was supported learning, you would ask for compensatory ed to make up for the time that they missed. Most districts are willing to do it. We had a student who was not in care, but who was sent home in Lake County. They told the parent, oh, we don't have a program like that for you here. They registered the student. Almost 2 years later, when the student ended up in truancy, they realized that they had never invited the student back to school, and the student stayed home for 2 years, literally. So there was a whole bunch of compensatory education involved in that. It was just, crazy things happen. Look, people are human, okay? People are human. We're all human. And so sometimes it's just a case of, you're right, making up for it once you catch it, making sure that the child is made whole at that point again. So, question in the back corner?
Comment primarily. I really appreciate your comments about trauma being kind of at the basis of what is going on with a lot of these kids. There's a new term, trauma-informed schools, and it would really be wonderful if we could start partnering with schools to get their staff up and trained in trauma. There's a wonderful movie that was put out several years ago called Paper Tigers. I don't know if anybody in the room is familiar.
Paper Tigers?
Order it off of Amazon for like $15. Wonderful piece of film about what a trauma-informed school looks like. But at the basis of it is these kids need to be taught regulation, emotional regulation, and that can be done through yoga programs, art programs, music programs, a lot of those sensory-based programs that target the trauma, the neurobiology of trauma.
Right. Right. Here's another pro tip. If you've got a kid with ADHD, ODD, that ODD is generally a trigger or a sign to us that that child has had a trauma somewhere, okay, an early life trauma. So it's just things like that, little things like that. But you're right. I believe it was Compton School District just had a huge lawsuit based on them not looking for trauma in their students, and instead, kind of just kicking them out. And now their entire district is going to be a trauma-informed care district because they have to do that as part of the settlement. But it's good for kids. When you're in schools, you see so many heavily impacted children in schools, and they're not all in care. It's been a difficult economy for a lot of parents, especially in Florida. It's just difficult, and I think we do have a lot of trauma in school, among the adults who suffer with it as well. I think the adults in school also become, on some level, trauma victims from everything they see and their inability to keep up with it because there aren't resources for them, I never met anybody who went into education because they didn't love kids, right? They all love kids. They are just, education is becoming difficult because there aren't enough resources for people. That's just my opinion. Anybody else have a question, comment? That's it? In the back?
You talked about trends earlier. Have you seen any trends where children who are in EBD schools are arrested less or suspended less?
Okay, so used to be, that is like the trend for EBD kids who are in programs as opposed to those who are just free range. It used to be we had center schools, right? Where center schools were kids, all of a certain kind of disability, went together to a separate school. I frankly am a big fan of that. I'm frankly a big fan of that. It gets the kids out of the general ed buildings, lets them calm down. It gives kids supported services. Unfortunately, we all got on this least restrictive environment bandwagon. No, everybody needs to be together. We all need to be as one. Terrible idea. So we pushed kids into these EBD classrooms in general ed schools. Those kids just kind of become targets at that point because the rooms are, like I said, the teachers aren't particularly well trained because they can't get a lot of EBD teachers in Florida. The kids become high flyers in the building. We used to call them high flyers. They're very noticeable. We know who they are. And plus, they're in there with other similarly situated kids, so they're learning the most creative behaviors on earth. And so, you know, they're in there together. And so you're forming these little posses of EBD kids that if they're behavioral, they're just learning how to do it better. Now, if they're mentally ill, they're in there just being further traumatized. And if they've got autism, they're probably also being more traumatized. Because there is a difference in a school between a kid who is just purposefully behavioral, based on whatever. They are purposely behavioral. These are kids that they're choosing, right? They're choosing. It feels good to be bad. And I can't say it better than that. There are kids who choose. But the majority of the kids that we help are not those kids. They're kids with autism. They're kids with mental health concerns. They're kids who have been traumatized. They're sexual survivors, you know, sexual abuse survivors. They're physical abuse survivors. They're the kids we represent. You know, they're kids that we really want to give them another chance. So, but yeah, they're all together in the same room. And no, I don't think it's a real effective system. So, anybody else? Are we keeping you guys late now? Are you late? Did we make you late? We're sorry. All right, thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time.